Welcome to the last session of the afternoon. It's great to be here. It's great to see lots of familiar faces in the audience. Fantastic to be here celebrating the PRI's 10th birthday. I was looking around earlier at the room. I couldn't think of a more birthday cake style building to be celebrating 10 years in as I was looking at the ceiling. My name is Hugh, Wheelan, Managing Editor of Responsible Investor magazine. And also the editor of ESG magazine. It's a real pleasure to be here on stage this afternoon with Fiona Reynolds, Managing Director of the Principles for Responsible Investment. We are going to be discussing, we have the sort of tough sounding title, Responsible Investment Means Business, which of course it does, the next evolution for the PRI. And we're going to run through a number of the sort of hot button topics as they're euphemistically described, talking about the PRI's 10-year blueprint, its accountability work, which is, I know, of great interest to a lot of people in this room, the consultation on a sustainable economy, which we've just heard referenced quite extensively in the last panel, and the recent impact evaluation study, amongst other things. We're going to attempt to do that in 30 minutes. This is going to be a whirlwind run through some really interesting and significant topics. But before we do that, I'm going to pass over, in effect, to you. I've always fancied doing this, actually, as a presenter. But we're going to run the videotape. I'm sure there'll be some faces you recognize. This is a video that was made of signatories responding to a number of those initiatives that I just mentioned. And if we can.
I think the remaining barriers to more widespread ESG integration are still around a perception by many across the investment chain as ESG being something separate from the investment process.
Is the absence of definition of what ESG means. Each asset manager, each asset owner have their own definition. This inconsistency is something that needs to be worked on.
Despite the high level of conversation, globally, there's still a kind of persistent misinterpretation of what this is about.
What does ESG mean? I've had investment managers give me presentations where I haven't recognised the E or the S or the G.
Long-term horizons for many of the actors are 3 to 5 years, whereas a lot of the ESG risks and opportunities are going to play out over a much longer period than that time frame.
The ESG factors tend to be quite long-term issues, and it's difficult for that signal to break through a lot of the market noise. But over time, it will.
One of the perceptions around performance is still out there, and it's still probably one of the biggest obstacles in terms of the performance question.
And even though there's been a lot of academic work and much more empirical work, as we know as an industry, based on the fact that this is not now true, that bias actually still exists with investors.
The investment industry need to stop thinking of environmental, social, and governance issues as mere externalities and non-financial factors. These are financial matters.
We are certain that ESG integration is in line with our fiduciary role, and indeed it is in line also for the investment performance we want to deliver.
So as we build a more robust series of studies, I think we'll convince even the pure alpha seekers that ESG integration is just good investing.
I think over the next decade, some of the important ESG issues at the micro level will be breaking it down into environmental is likely to be climate related.
The most important ESG issues are likely to be on the E side of the equation, that is the environment.
But perhaps kind of more specifically, things to do with population growth and kind of greater scarcity of water resources and food.
It's time for PRI to step up on the plate about the E factor.
Under the S for social, I think these are likely to do with issues of growing inequality. Under the G for governance, there's a hard G, which is the increasing role that regulation will have to play. And there's a soft G, which is the creation of new benchmarks and investable indices.
But I think there will be some new and novel issues for us to tackle. The first area I think is robotics and the increasing automation.
We think that the acceleration in artificial intelligence, for example, will certainly append society's way of organizing and valuing human capital.
And also cyber risk of the Internet of Things, which could see put at risk, for example, pacemakers and many other devices in our homes and lives.
And then finally, I think there's fragility in our institutions. I think that the increasing flow and speed with which information spreads means that legitimacy might be questioned and they might be more easily toppled.
I believe PRI should focus making sure that the signatories adopt a behavior which is in line with the PRI, and this is for the asset owners and the asset managers. At the same time, making sure that those signatories that do not adopt the correct behavior should not remain as signatories.
Whichever route, I think there is a role for PRI to make signatories more accountable.
PRI is an amazingly important organization, and there are a number of key roles I think it can play. I think it needs to continue on its educational role.
Bridging the gap between the world of ESG analysis and research and financial analysis. This will provide a greater transition to the systematic integration of environmental, social, and governance issues into our practice.
But there are other market players as well. For example, all the beneficiaries of the asset owners. I see in the next decade those individuals playing more and more of a role in terms of shaping what responsible investment means for their pension dollars.
I think one of the key things that the PRI can do going forward is to be a bigger voice and a more unified voice for the global investment community when it comes to policymaking.
And to be a voice for the future, not just in developed markets, but also developing, on how ESG integration is an important part of the investment process.
I think over the next decade, PRI probably needs to focus on translating that into action and impact, and particularly in relation to how the finance sector can get movement towards the Sustainable Development Goals.
I think that PRI should really encourage people to share both their successes and failures.
Many of the challenges in the field of ESG are collective action challenges.
If we collaborate together and improve our investment process towards greater ESG integration, all of us have a potential to become leaders in a space.
Come on, excellent stuff. If you look around the room and you see any of the people that were involved in that video, you can check back with them later how they think their performance was on screen. But we heard some really interesting stuff there. A lot of varied responses to the work that's going on in the PRI. Definition, performance, of course, whether laggards or those that aren't doing any activity should be sort of considered as not being part of the PRI anymore. A number of other issues. We even got through to the issue of robotics, which we heard up there earlier. Sort of future look at where investment trends are going. I wanted to start off by asking you, Fiona, about the 10-year blueprint that you're putting together and what you want to achieve with that and why you're doing it effectively. Is that mic on? Can we use it on?
Yep. Okay. I suppose that there's a number of reasons why we're doing this. Obviously, turning 10 this year gives us an opportunity, like we're doing now, to celebrate the PRI and the success of us as an organisation, but also, of course, of all of the signatories and what's happened in responsible investment. And we obviously know that a lot's happened over the last decade, but if we sit back, we also know that we're not actually where we would say the job is now finished and responsible investment's done and everyone's deeply integrating ESG into all of the investment processes. So that's one reason. how do we actually just sit back and think about, well, where do we want to be in the next 10 years? What does a good responsible investor look like in the next 10 years? And how do we get there? And then the second issue for the PRI is, as we've grown as an organisation, we've got 1,510 signatories in 50 countries, 62 trillion in assets under management and growing. And a lot of our signatories want different things from us. So you listen to the video or you listen to what people talk about, and they've all got different priorities about what they think is really important. And this means that the organisation can be overwhelmed sometimes about the level of work that it's got and the expectations on it. And setting a clear 10-year direction, I think, will help us. It will also help signatories understand where we're trying to get to. We want the blueprint not just to be a document that's about us internally, although obviously that's a part of it. What does the PRI need to do to help shape the next decade of responsible investment? But we also want it to be something that our signatories can use, and the rest of the investment community can use more generally in thinking about the next decade.
If you were describing to someone who didn't necessarily know the PRI, let's talk about people outside in the world, and you said we've had 10 years of doing this and the next 10 years are going to be this. How would you describe the blueprint to them if you were just giving the sort of nub of the work you do?
Sure. Well, I suppose to me at this stage, and I mean we're still consulting about it, but I suppose I'm thinking about it having about 8 different elements, and we can talk about those elements a little bit more. But one of the key things is about accountability and transparency, and I think accountability's come up a lot. It came up in the video, and by that I mean accountability to the principals, I mean accountability to beneficiaries, accountability to clients. Then I think there's the issue of roadblocks to long-term investing and ensuring that we have a sustainable financial system that we talked about in the last session. And I think this will be important work because we can all talk about being long-term investors, but then there is all of this short-termism that goes on that are really roadblocks and obstacles to long-term investing. And whether that's issues that people raised about the way that incentives work, the principal agent problem, the delegated investment chain, they are all roadblocks to real long-term investing. And so it's not just enough to say that responsible investment is about me engaging with the companies that I invest in. I'm also part of the investment chain, and I need to interact with the actual investment system. So that's another part. And then I think a third will really be about the Sustainable Development Goals. And the Sustainable Development Goals, I think, are a chance for us to think about what real-world impact do we have as investors? Because it's all very well to say that we put in great processes about responsible investment to be a better investor, but at the end of the day, if it doesn't really mean anything, if we're actually not moving money into a sustainable economy, if we're not moving money into green finance, if we're not actually achieving anything, then I'm not sure what the actual point of it all is. So we want to move from measuring process, which is good, but also to be measuring impact and outcomes. And again, I think the Sustainable Development Goals are a way of doing that. I think the other thing that came up, another sort of arm, is empowering asset owners. And asset owners, PRI is an asset owner-led organisation. It was started by asset owners, and asset owners are the key to driving responsible investment forward. And then there's the policy and regulatory side. So how do we get good regulation that will drive responsible investment? How, again, do we remove regulatory roadblocks? And we've got good work that's going on there about fiduciary duty, good stewardship, how do we get good stewardship codes? Then I think the other parts are deep ESG integration, because ESG integration is actually quite shallow across the world. So how do we, the PRI, develop the right tools for that? And then I think the other issue is also around voting and vote transparency as well. And that seems to be coming up a bigger issue, and something that I want us to give some thought to with signatories. So there's sort of some of the elements that we're thinking about at the moment.
There's some really big there's some big beast topics there amongst those, and we come back to them afterwards. But maybe just to sort of try and hone down a couple of things there. So, I mean, it sounds the work you're doing is very much creating the rationale for responsible investment in some ways. Is that something that the PRI is capable of doing? I mean, it's a big thing to sort of bite off a sustainable economy. We heard a panel just now which was looking at those issues, but that's an incredible piece of work. Is that something that an organisation like the PRI can do? Is it something that it has to do before it can move forward?
So I think the PRI can absolutely do this kind of work. Obviously, it's not work that we will do on our own. We're in the wonderful position of having access to a fantastic group of investors in our signatory base. I think we have the capability as well within our staff. We can work with other organisations, and we do work with many other organisations. We're not seeking to do work that others are already doing and just duplicate effort. That's just a waste of everybody's time. So I think, as Nathan said, what we're trying to do is come up with what are 5 big meaty projects probably that we can do over the next decade that are really those roadblocks that I talked about. How do we really tackle short-termism, the principal agent problem, delegated investment chain? How do we really get some meaning about those issues? Because for as long as I've worked in the finance sector in pensions, which is more than 20 years, these issues have been discussed. So sometimes it's time to stop discussing them and try to come up with answers. Try to come up with some action to them. Yeah. And if the PRI signatory base has got 62 trillion in assets under management, what better amount of money talks to be able to try and influence some of these issues. And none of us are pretending that they're easy issues, that we could tackle them overnight, that they won't take years, maybe even decades to actually get traction on. But again, they're roadblocks to long-term responsible investment, and we need to try to remove them.
Okay. The other discussion point that was raised in the last panel was the Sustainable Development Goals. In my experience in the investment world, if you mention an initiative like the SDGs to people in the finance world, they immediately look the other way, make a very quick excuse for an exit, sort of slightly yawn a little bit about another big UN project. And I think I think there's an end poverty, end hunger, end everything kind of approach here. Why is the PRI looking to align itself with those? And is that a practical thing to do?
Okay, well, a few things there. Obviously, the PRI is a UN-supported organisation. These are new goals that have just been signed by, all of our countries, from people sitting around here in the room. And we've got a lot of signatories who are already starting to think about the Sustainable Development Goals, thinking about how some of them can be investable, thinking about what their role is to play. A lot of them are thinking from their countries that they're going to have to report on the Sustainable Development Goals. And so there's a number of signatories have already, as I said, approached us about these, saying we don't want to see another investor initiative pop up about Sustainable Development Goals or another reporting framework around it. We'd rather the PRI really think about it. So there's 17 goals. I don't think it actually means that the PRI needs to tackle every one of those goals. I think we need to sit back and analyse what are the goals that are important for investors, what's the role that investors can play. And if you already think about some of our work already meets Sustainable Development Goals. So, there's issues, for example, around climate change, and there's issues about there's a goal about sustainable infrastructure, there's a goal around water. We do work on all of these issues already. So I actually don't think it's that big a stretch. It's about, I think, reframing some of the work that we're doing to match some of the Sustainable Development Goals. I think the Sustainable Development Goals too are about real-world impact, and I think investments should be productive and should have real-world impact.
Great. Certainly those SDGs are feeding into high-level policy decisions as well, so certainly a strategic reason to be thinking about those. Let's get down to some of the nuts and bolts of the accountability and differentiation survey that was done. I think in journalistic terms, we probably call that a naming and shaming report, but it's much more granular than that. I was just looking at some of the top line data from that survey. 71% of signatories want some form of differentiation, which effectively some form of ranking measurement, which we were talking about earlier. Between those signatories that are at an advanced stage of ESG integration, those that aren't, a lot of support for some form of banding, gold, silver, bronze, looking at how there may be sort of an element to demonstrate to investors outside who's doing what and what they are doing. Can you talk to us a bit about the time frame for this work and what you think is achievable? This is a notoriously difficult area to come down, as was mentioned earlier, huge range of signatories, different motivations. How do you think you're going to do something meaningful on this and on what timescale?
Okay, so maybe a little bit just about the consultation then. So we've been undertaking a consultation, and we actually don't finish the whole consultation till August. And we started off with a signatory survey, which around 400 signatories responded to, and then that helped us frame the next two consultation papers that we put out. The first one was about accountability and diversity. And one of the things within the signatory base, thinking about how large the signatory base is you've got investors of all different sizes, so that's one thing, and people have got access to different levels of resources. You've got people who have been doing responsible investment well before the PRI was around, and then you've got people who are just coming to it today. You've got developing countries that we want to bring in to responsible investment, and in many ways some of these, particularly in developing countries, they'll say to us, well, we'd like to join the PRI, but we don't really want to be compared to somebody who's been doing this for 30 years. How can you differentiate between the signatory base better? So that's one side of it. The other side is within the signatory base of signatories wanting to see leadership. Who are the leaders? What are the leaders doing? How will I learn from them? How can we showcase leadership? And saying things like, well, I'm an investment manager who has put a lot of time and resource into responsible investment, and we go out for an RFP. Someone wants to know if you're a PRI signatory, and my colleagues down the road ended up being the investment manager chosen, but I know that they don't actually do anything very much about responsible investment. So that just
which is something you and I must hear quite regularly.
Yes. So that just saying that that you're a PRI signatory is not enough anymore. We now need to go to another level where we can differentiate a little bit. Now, on this issue, it's a complicated issue, and there's lots of different views. But overwhelmingly, I think it's how do we showcase leadership, and I think that we can tackle that issue definitely.
Any idea what kind of time scale you'll be looking at? And maybe if I can throw it in now, when are you going to kick out people who don't do anything?
Okay, so, well, that's another part of the consultation, so I'll deal with that.
That was in there. I looked at it. I think it was called non-progressors, I think they're called in the study, which is...
So a large part of the consultation was about accountability, and we talked about accountability from 2 points of view. It's really about, and I think what people want us really to deal with are those people who sign the PRI. Maybe it's because they want to be able to respond to an RFP.
I think, as Jane said earlier, every time an RFP comes in, boom, there's a new signatory. Yeah.
But they actually don't have any commitment to it, and they haven't actually done anything, and they don't want to do it. So we have to have some mechanism to be able to remove those signatories, and that's what we're looking to build. We're not, it's that end of the scale that end of the tail that we're looking at. We're not looking to punish people whose progress might be a little slow because they don't have a lot of resources. That's not what the PRI is about. The PRI is about trying to get everybody moving and get them to the next stage. But if you've got people there who don't want to do anything, they just want to use your brand, and in the process they diminish the brand for all the other signatories, then you have to act on that. So that's one element. And the other part is that if we had a signatory who was knowingly involved in a scandal, so whether that was a financial fraud, for example, and at the moment we don't have a mechanism to deal with that. So we want to look at a mechanism for, someone knowingly involved in something like a financial fraud and environmental catastrophe. We're not talking about where a signatory might invest in a company and with the best will in the world and the best processes in the world, that the company does something wrong. We're talking about where the investor does something wrong. So, as I said, the consultation finishes at the end of in August. Will be finally finished. We hope at our SGM to signal the high-level things that we will do. We'll put out the blueprint in the first quarter of next year, and we'll signpost when everything's going to happen. This is a 10-year blueprint. We have to be mindful of the fact that the PRI itself can only absorb so many changes at one time, and some of these are big changes, and that our signatories can only absorb so much change as well.
It would be difficult to speak about accountability without talking about some of the problems that you've had, of course, with the PRI. And you did, you had a number of signatories who left a few years ago, tended to be all from Denmark. In fact, they were all from Denmark. You did a governance review as a result, and a very detailed governance review at that. When are they going to be coming back to the PRI?
Well, not all of Denmark left. There's some very good Danish signatories sitting in the audience here that I can see. So yes, they very kindly did that when I just started at the PRI.
It was
That's one of my first issues to deal with. So and Martin's as well when he came on board as chair. So we did a very detailed governance review. It took us I think 12 to 18 months to get through it. We put it to signatories who had to vote on it because it meant changes to our Articles of Association, and 98.8% of the signatories voted in favour of it. So I would hope that those signatories do come back to the PRI, but we've done what we said that we would do. We made every commitment we made, we have honoured, and so
you had any indication they might come back?
Well, we have had a number of meetings with the ex-Danish signatories, and I do hope that they will come back at some stage. But as I said, we've done the review. We've honoured what we said that we would do.
Okay, thanks for that. Let's maybe just. It would be really useful, I think, to as we sort of draw to an end, to get a perspective from you as the MD of the PRI about where some of these initiatives are going to lead. So you're doing the 10-year blueprint, you're looking at accountability, you've done a lot of work on impact. What's the goal here? How's this going to define the next 10 years of the PRI? I mean, there's some criticism out there, of course, that we've got a huge number of members in the organisation, massive volume of assets that's used quite regularly, but there's a sense that there's a lot of lip service being paid to ESG integration. Can you talk to us about your sort of vision about how these things are going to come together and take this movement forward?
Sure. Well, again, I think I'm probably repeating some of the things that I already said, but yes, we do talk about the fact that there's 62 trillion in assets under management, but we know that not every one of those 62 trillion is invested in a sustainable way. So part of what we want to achieve over the next 10 years, as I said, is getting real ESG integration across as many of those assets as we can. Then we've got half of the institutional investors as PRI signatories, so we still want to bring others into responsible investment. We want to go into countries in that responsible investment has still not started, because at the end of the day, investors are global investors. And a number of our signatories will say to us, well, we're really trying to invest in emerging markets, but when we have discussions with companies and other investors there and we talk about our ESG, requirements, people look at us blankly, and we really need the PRI to play that role of educating and getting other markets starting. So I think that's another key component. Get everyone moving more and doing more. We're in early days, and responsible investment being deeply ingrained is still we've still got a long way to go. As I said, we've got to remove obstacles to and make sure that when we're investing, that the actual markets that we invest in are stable and that they do allow long-term investing. And we want to have real-world impact. And I think there's some of the key things, and I think we will do that as well through having about a better accountability and transparency about the principles. So one of the other issues that we've asked in the consultation is, do we need to actually change the principles themselves? Do we actually need to add another principle to the PRI? So the PRI's mission is, part of its mission is actually to create a sustainable financial system. But that is not anywhere embedded within the actual principles themselves. All the principles, as Martin was talking about earlier, are really about the relationship between the investor and the investee company. And then they're about the fact that you'll report to the PRI and we'll collaborate. But they're not about wider issues that we think are important to responsible investment. So we've asked, do we need a seventh principle that is around those?
So there was someone leaving.
They've got
upset. Seventh principle.
They're walking out. So do we need a seventh principle around those issues to make that more front and centre? Or do the 6 principles that we already have, are they still fine? Or is 10 years later, do they need to be updated? I think someone else on one of the panels, and this comes up a bit, also talked about the fact, might have been Jane, that when they were put together, they were really thought of in the way of about
it was a big church approach,
about the equity space, but not so much about other asset classes. And so, are they applicable now that people are actually embedding responsible investment across all of their asset classes?
I was going to say it's a big church approach. Being in a big church, that's quite appropriate. If you had a choice of something you might want to, I'm not going to hold you to this, Fiona, but if you could introduce a 7th principle, what might it be? One issue, what topic that you think is is not being looked at properly? Needs some real
if it was my choice,
if it was just your choice,
and I was writing it, I would have a principle that said that investments need to be productive and they need to benefit society as a whole.
Okay, and I know corporate governance is an area that you are particularly active on. What do you think might or should happen there as well? Something that's regularly chewed over in the press and amongst investors, maybe the sort of hottest topic, but what should happen there?
So I think in the area of corporate governance, the one that's coming up from a lot of our signatories to us at the moment is really about proxy voting transparency. And I think a lot of this has come up around the issues to do with around Exxon and Chevron not being able to get up the fact that signatories were trying to vote to get a 2 degrees, business scenario planning from a company, which should seem like a reasonable thing that you should be able to get from a company. It doesn't seem like an extraordinary ask. And that, there's many investors who aren't voting, or they'll just vote with management. And that does there need to be more accountability and more transparency around voting, for example, from investment managers to asset owners, etc. So that's something we haven't got the answer to. We just want to start having some thoughts about. And I think something around these kinds of transparent issues will form part of a 10-year plan.
Fiona, thank you very much indeed for that. It's been great to chat to you up here on stage. We are going to end with another piece of video, and this actually is entitled the PRI Challenge. I need to do my run VT kind of thing with the person who's controlling the video. But if we could have the PRI Challenge, I know.
Before we do that, whoever's playing the video, before we do that, I just wanted to remind people again that the consultation is still open, that the PRI doesn't have any fixed views about all of the issues that we're taking forward. That's why we're taking a long time to do the consultation. We want to make sure that these are really issues that signatories feel comfortable with, that they think, but that will drive responsible investment forward. We've had a huge amount of buy-in, I've got to say, huge amount. I've been really surprised about how many people have participated in the consultations, in the blueprint workshops that we've been doing around the world. So I would, again, really like to thank all of the signatories who have participated. We've been asking a lot of people to put in a lot of time and thought to serious issues, and you really have, and we really, really appreciate that. I'd also like to take the opportunity, though, while I'm sitting here, I've thanked the signatories, and we've talked a lot about the PRI and its development. But one of the things about the PRI was it wouldn't be the organisation it is today without all of the fantastic people who put in so much time, whether that's on advisory committees, working groups, on our boards. And I want to thank them for all of their time over the last 10 years, everyone who's participated. But I particularly want to thank the PRI staff, many of them are sitting up there, who you couldn't hope to work with.
I was wondering who that was up there.
Yeah. You couldn't hope to work with a more fantastic group of people who are so committed to our signatories, to responsible investment, and to really driving responsible investment forward. There's also a number of our past staff who are here as well. So to all of those past and present, and hopefully some future staff who are in the audience, I really want to thank them for all of their efforts and getting also behind driving responsible investment forward. But so now we can play the video.
I think that merits a round of applause. Yeah, thanks.
10 years ago, UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan
and some of the world's largest institutional investors
launched PRI,
the Principles for Responsible Investment.
Many people had not heard
the PRI 6 principles,
but they are essential to making our global financial system
more transparent and sustainable.
The principles urge investors
to integrate ESG,
environmental, social, and governance issues into their decision-making,
and recognize the effects
these issues have on investment performance.
Issues like climate change,
tax avoidance,
and executive pay
are at the top of the PRI's agenda. To date, 1,500 organizations have signed the principles.
Together they manage $60 trillion
US dollars,
which affects us all,
as this represents
more than half of all globally managed assets.
While significant progress
has been made
in a relatively short period of time, it is not enough.
It is not enough.
It's not enough.
It's not enough.
To nie je dostačujíce.
It's not enough.
As part of the 10-year anniversary,
in 2016,
the PRI wants to shape the next decades of responsible investing.
The PRI is asking the investment industry
to take further action on accountability,
stewardship, and sustainability.
We need everyone to join us.
To be part of the solution.
To implement the change we need.
To improve the way companies and markets work.
To help solve the big problems
facing the environment and society today.
Here's the challenge. Questa è la sfida.
Voici le défi.
Here is the challenge.
Here's the challenge.
Hier ist die Herausforderung.
और काम करना है.
挑戦があります。
Tu je výzva.
وناول التحدي.
到底是哪些挑战呢？
Well, here's the challenge.
Challenge your pension fund
to adopt the principles.
Challenge your employer.
Challenge your employer to be more transparent.
It's about their sustainability strategies
and practices.
Challenge governments.
Challenge governments.
Challenge governments.
Challenge governments
to create the right framework
for responsible investment.
To flourish around the world and ensure companies are more transparent
about how they manage ESG.
The change we seek must be driven by everyone if it is to be sustainable.
So finally,
we challenge all PRI signatories
to post this video on their website
as a sign
of continued commitment
to the PRI principles.
Congratulations, happy 10th anniversary, PRI.